Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the show. It's just before New Year's. Christmas is over. Happy New Year's, everybody. Now listen, today is 28th, a Saturday, and I'm going to do my year-end predictions of what's going to happen in the economy next year. All the way through. That's what I'm going to do today. Okay? So, what do we see? We're going to see continuations. The universal law is that objects in motion tend to stay in motion. So, we see an accommodative Federal Reserve. But here's the thing. There's a stipulation in this. They did an about face this year. They were going to do raise interest rates. Like, they planned on raising interest rates like 4 or 5 times, this year. And they had to drop interest rates. They had to do an about face. And they were all about quantitative tightening, when they were going into this year. And now they're all about quantitative easing. That's a complete 180-degree turn by the Fed. Well, that's not went unnoticed in the markets. And we see a considerable uptick in the markets this year. So my prediction is for next year is they've pumped these markets up now, and the stock market is in a hyper bubble, but yet it goes higher. Yet it goes higher into a hyperbolic hyper bubble territory. So what I'm predicting is going to happen is the Fed right now and the central banks, they are basically starting to hold in reserve the little bit of firepower they have left in the monetary policies that they are working with right now. They have certain monetary policies they're using. Quantitative easing. They have stimulating the overnight market, the repo market. This is certain policies that they have right now. And also they're quite accommodative. But here's the thing. Lowering interest rates has limitations. They only have a little bit left in reserve of firepower left to lower interest rates because they're not far above. So they got a little tick there. They got a few basis points they can work with. Like 100, I think it's 175 basis points they can work with still. They're holding that in reserve. It's kind of like you'd hold if you're playing poker, kind of like you'd hold an ace card in reserve, An ace up your sleeve is the old saying they used to have in poker. A guy has an ace up his sleeve. So those 175 basis points is an ace up their sleeve. So they got that ace up their sleeve. And they don't want to let go of that. They're not lower interest rates right now. They've said they're going to go on hold. Also, as far as going into real quantitative easing, where they buy the longer end of right now they're buying the shorter end, they're buying T-bills, but to move into the longer end, the real quantitative easing, they're holding that in reserve as well as a policy. But all of these policies that they've been using are starting to become lackluster. They don't have the power to move markets like they used to have, but they're still holding them in reserve. So what I see is, I see this melt up continuing for the first little bit into the New Year's. How far? I'm not exactly sure. The melt up in the stock markets, in the S&P 500 and in the Dow Jones. I see this melt up continuing a little ways in. But then all of a sudden, I see it falling out of bed sometime in the new year. How far in do we get into the new year before I see this fall in the markets, the Dow Jones? I would say that the fall is going to occur when we get bad news from other countries like Germany, which is going into a recession. When that bad news comes in from the German economic numbers, their GDP numbers and stuff, when that bad news starts to come in, we've already got a market that's went too far. It's been pushed up too far. And at the same time, we got the Fed who is holding their firepower back now a little bit because they want to have a little bit in reserve. Well, the way I see it is they're going to have to use that firepower that they have in reserve when the market starts to fall sometime into the new year. And I think they will. I think they're going to have, because these policies that they have are starting to become like pushing on a string, I think when they do use these policies, it'll halt the fall in the market. But it's going to take more than that to get the market up, to keep it moving up through the election cycle. So I think what we're going to see is a change in Fed policy again. In other words, we saw a huge shift in Fed policy this year. From them going from quantitative tightening into basically quantitative easing, and from instead of raising interest rates into lowering interest rates. But now they're holding pat. They're stopping. They're like, we're on hold. That is not going to last long. So my prediction into the new year is that we're not going to get far into the new year before the market's going to take a tumble. And when the market takes a tumble, and we're talking about a correction here, we're talking about a correction of maybe 10 to 20% in the market. The Fed is going to use these tools that they're holding reserving now. In other words, I'm predicting that when we see the market fall off into the new year, and it might be 3 months into the new year, might be 4 months into the new year when we see this fall in the markets. The market might go up higher than it is now before we see this fall, but we're going to see a fall off of 10 to 20% in the market. And then the Fed is going to use these tools that they're holding in reserve right now to try to halt the market slide. In other words, I'm saying they're going to go back to quantitative easing, and they're going to go back to real quantitative easing, and they're going to start lowering interest rates down to zero. This is the next move. This is the next chess move for the Fed to restore confidence in the market. And the market will start to be buoyed. It'll stop its slide. But in order to stop that slide, what they're going to do is they're going to start the ball rolling toward the consumer inflation. Because when that happens, that's when we're going to see strength in gold. Thing is when the market correction occurs into next year, not far into next year, which way will gold, silver, and cryptocurrencies move? I think we'll see an uptick in gold and silver. I'm not so sure about cryptocurrencies. So I think we'll see gold and silver move up. And then, when the Fed comes in to react to this market slide, and there's going to be a lot of fear when the market slide occurs, we're probably going to see the market lose 10 to 20%. There's going to be a lot of fear because they've been waiting for this recession because we saw the yield curve inversion. They're waiting on bated breath for it. So when it happens, when we see this market turn over and fall 10 to 20% sometime into next year, maybe 2 or 3 months into next year, probably the most likely time is going to be when the GDP numbers come out, and also it's more open and above board that China is going into a big time slowdown. GDP numbers come out for Germany, and the Eurozone starts to look like they're getting in trouble again. That's when we're going to see this market slide off. So we got a turbulent new year coming, moving into the financial scene of next year. There's going to be a lot of turbulence. It's going to be a lot of, what's the word I could use for it, when you get the volatility. A lot of volatility in the markets. And we're going to see the Fed become even more accommodative. The big question mark in my mind is can they get through the entire election cycle without a major fall in the markets? Because to do that, they're going to have to pump the markets up higher and higher and higher. And the higher you pump something, the more cheap, easy money you put into something, the bigger the fall's going to be when it finally really does get here. Now, let's just, for argument's sake, say that they can say they have a little fall in the markets at 10 to 20%, and then they come in with very easy monetary policy, very accommodative monetary policy, and then they drive the market up again, so we exceed 30,000 before the election cycle's over. You know, what are we going to do then when we move into 2021? Well, then we're going to get more than just a correction. We're going to get a crash in 2021, and it's probably going to be the worst crash of our lifetimes because they've held it off for so long and haven't let it correct it to fair market value that, you know, this is not a new paradigm we're going into. This markets still are markets. You know, they tried to control the market crash in 1929. They stepped in and tried to control it when it was really on. But because it had been pumped up so high with margin debt that you can't control it. And if they keep pushing this cheap, easy money in, and, you know, we have not seen the limit to what the Fed can do. You know, we've seen quantitative easing, but before we seen quantitative easing, we never realized that they could do this much and carry things this far, and now they're going to carry it that much further, and who knows what sort of monetary policy they're going to bring out to maybe go above and beyond quantitative easing even. So maybe some sort of programs we've never heard of before will become commonplace for them to accelerate and keep driving up this market higher and higher and higher, because the higher they drive it, the more emphasis they're putting on it as the economy. In other words, the stock market is the economy. Everything's about the stock market. Oh, the stock market's doing good, the rest of the economy must be doing good. But this is not true, because the stock market is now separating from the general economy, and it's in its own little kingdom, doing what it's doing. The stock markets. You know, where the general economy, we see shopping malls empty. You can hear crickets in the shopping malls across America this season. Even at Christmas time, there's only a slight uptick in traffic in the shopping malls. We got a general economy where there's a shift being made from, yes, the consumer is still spending, but how are they spending? Is anybody asking that question? What are they buying and how are they getting the money to spend? Well, they're putting it on their credit cards. And credit card debt is growing massively, but it's like live for the day, sort of as an idea. You know, the people out there, they're like, we're going to live for the day, we're going to live rich for the day across America, but we're not going to really worry about tomorrow. So they're all putting things on their credit cards, and this is increasing the power of the consumer, but the general economy is not really recovered since 2008. So I'm kind of starting to move more and more in the direction of what Gerald Celente says, that we're going to go into the greatest depression ever in 2021. I think there's a possibility now, and I can see this possibility moving into this next year, that the Federal Reserve will do whatever it takes to get us through into 2021. But then what do? Because they get to a certain point where the market's considerably higher, could be considerably higher than it is now. It could be above 30,000. And everything else in the general economy's fallen to pieces to support it all. You know? I mean, what happens if you build a giant house of cards on a table? The table acts as a support. Everything's great as long as the table's there nice and solid under the house of cards. But what happens if somebody comes along and shakes the table? Well, that's the general economy out there. That's the economy that we have all over the world is supporting these stock markets. And what happens? That's the table. What happens if we get basically an earthquake in the general economy where people just can't take out any more debt, and it actually starts to deflate the general economy while they're still inflating the Wall Street economy? What happens then? We're already seeing the signs of this happening, so I see a further advancement of this into 2020. I see him, if we do get as far as 2021, I see the whole thing falling to pieces. You can only carry this charade so far. So, I'm starting to move more and more in the opinion that perhaps they can carry this thing through 2020. And then it fall completely, because they've carried it, because they'd be able to carry it that far, kick the can down the road that far. I see an end of road coming to the can, ultimately in the end, and it leading to something that is just absolutely mind-blowing to deal with, because basically they've carried this thing so far since 2008, extend and pretend so far, that they've created such an enormous bubble that when it finally does actually pop, what they're doing now is they're inflating more and more pressure yet into an already overinflated bubble. And when it finally does really pop, it could be absolutely devastating. So this next year, 2020, we might make it all the way through 2020. It is a possibility. But in order to get us through 2020, they're going to have to inflate this bubble a lot bigger than it is now, even. Because the whole thing is exponential. And so, in order to keep inflating it all the way through 2020, they're probably going to have to nearly double the size of the thing. So then if it pops, it's going to be something for the record books. Something that'll be remembered in our history for the next 200 years. if they can carry it through. Now, what if they can't carry it through? Well, we'll have the crisis in 2020 then, if they can't carry it through. It's going to have to remain to be seen, but I'm thinking that they're going to pull out all the stops to try to carry this thing right through the 2020 election cycle. Now, at this point. So that's my prediction for this coming year. Thank you guys for listening. Like and subscribe. We're going to be back with the market reports, keeping our eye on the markets. Starting the first of the new year. Happy holidays to you guys. You guys have a great day. Give me a thumbs up. Really need that participation on my channel. At least a thumbs up. Comments are great. I try to read all my comments. It's difficult because there's a lot of comments. And I try to answer all the questions in the comments, So if you guys have questions about the financial system, I like those questions, Bye-bye, guys, and you have a great new year.